Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stephen Kingcast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review a different entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in the chronological order of publication.
Today, we'll be reviewing 1981's heartwarming tale of man's best friend, Cujo. I just want to preface this review by reminding you, or informing you if you haven't known this, that Stephen King was so coked up during this time period he doesn't remember writing this book at all. Just keep that in mind during this review. Now, I just want to take a moment and thank all the listeners out there. I at the time of this recording, the Stephen Kingcast has had 330 listens. That might be, just change in a bucket. Is that the right metaphor? I don't know. But that it might not seem a lot, but it's a lot to me because when I started, I didn't think I was going to get any listens. I was really just doing this, for myself as just a way to keep, being, creative, and just, I had the software, and I just wanted to do something creative. So I thought of this. And like I said, I wanted to just create the kind of podcast that I wanted to listen to myself. I didn't know if I was going to get any views. I didn't know if it was going to just expand beyond the circle of my friends, even to say that I don't even know my friends were going to listen. But, people are out there listening to this. It's 330. That to me is a lot, and I really appreciate it. So I don't know at the time when this drops if that's going to increase or people have listened to the earlier ones and said, I've had enough of this guy. But regardless, as of right now, I just really appreciate all the listens, and those of you that have followed me on Instagram, on Twitter. I really, really appreciate it. So just, if you keep coming back, I'm going to keep pumping them out. And feel free to write at any time because, like I said, I don't want this to be just a one-way communication. I really want this to be back and forth. I really want to hear what you have to say. So feel free to write in. If I say anything that you disagree with, just write in. So, I can read, how you feel. On the air, and we can have a discourse about this because I honestly do not want this to be all me because who am I? And during my analysis of any one particular book, I might miss things. There's times, I'll be honest, with this book especially, and I'll get into it later, that I kind of might glance over something here and there, and I might miss something that's incredibly important. So please feel free to drop me an email at stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. So I've only read this book once before, so rereading it, it was an experience. I'll say that much at least. And unfortunately, for me, it wasn't a pleasant one. But I'll get into that in a moment. But first, I want to read the Wikipedia summary in order to lay the foundation upon which I'll build my review. And just so you know, I've been joined in this podcast by my own two personal Cujos, my faithful companions. So if you hear any snorting and growling and wheezing in the background, that's my little podcast hosts over here. So Wikipedia summary states that the story takes place in the fictional town of Castle Rock, Maine, the setting of numerous King works, and revolves around two local families. The narrative is interspersed with vignettes from the seemingly mundane lives of various other residents. There are no chapter headings, but rather breaks in between passages which indicate when the narration switches to a different point of view. I'm going to stop and interject right there and say that I really like the fact that the Wikipedia summary just tackles the structure of the book and the fact that it revolves around two local families. I'm sorry, I'm just supposed to read the Wikipedia summary. I don't really want, I'm chomping at the bit to sink my teeth into this book. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep on. The principal characters are the Trenton and the Camber families. The middle-class Trentons have recently moved to Castle Rock from New York, bringing with them their 4-year-old son, Tad. Father Vic discovers that his wife, Donna, has recently concluded an affair. In the midst of this household tension, Vic's fledgling advertising agency is failing, and he is forced to travel out of town, leaving Tad and Donna at home. The blue-collar Cambers are longtime residents. Joe is a shady mechanic who dominates and abuses his wife, Charity, and their 10-year-old son, Brett. Charity wins a $5,000 lottery prize and uses the proceeds to convince Joe into allowing her to take Brett on a trip to visit Jerry's sister Holly in Connecticut. Charity's sister Holly in Connecticut. Joe acquiesces, secretly planning to use that time to take a pleasure trip up to Boston. Then there's Cujo. The Camber's large, good-natured St. Bernard chases a wild rabbit in the fields around their house and inserts his head into an entrance into a small limestone cave where a rabid bat bites him on the nose and infects him with the virus that causes Cujo's madness in one day. Soon after Charity and Brett leave him, Cujo attacks and kills their alcoholic neighbor, Gary Purview. He returns to the Camber house and kills Joe while he attempts to call authorities for help. Donna, home alone with Tad, takes their failing Ford Pinto to the Cambers for repairs. The car breaks down in Camber's front dooryard. And as Donna attempts to find Joe, Cujo appears and is ready to pounce. She climbs back into the car, and Cujo starts to attack. Donna and Tad are trapped inside the vehicle, the interior of which becomes increasingly hot in the sun. During one attempt to escape, Donna is bitten in the stomach and leg, but manages to survive and escape back into her car. She plans to run for the Camber's house, but abandons the idea due to her fears that the door will be locked and she will be subsequently killed by Cujo, leaving her son alone. Vic returns to Castle Rock after failed attempts to contact Donna and learns from the police that Steve Kemp, the man with whom Donna was having an affair, is suspected of ransacking his home and possibly kidnapping Donna and Tad. In an effort to explore all leads, the state police send Castle Rock Sheriff George Bannerman out to the Camber's house, but Cujo attacks and kills him. Donna, after witnessing the attack and realizing that Tad is in danger of dying of dehydration, faces down Cujo with a baseball bat, breaking it over his head and fatally stabbing him in the eye with the broken end. Vic immediately arrives afterwards, only to discover that Tad has died. Donna is rushed to the hospital and Cujo's head is removed for a biopsy prior to cremation of his remains, which are then thrown into the Augusta's waste treatment plant. The novel ends several months later with both the Trenton and Camber families trying to go on with their lives. Donna has completed her treatment for rabies and survived her marriage with Vic, and Charity gives Brett a new vaccinated puppy named Willie. A postscript reminds the reader that Cujo was a good dog who always tried to keep his owners happy, but the ravage of rabies drove him to violence.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to start with the objectivity of the reviewer, myself, and a little bit of positive. So, just right away, the book starts with a reference to the Dead Zone, and by immediately referencing the events of the Dead Zone, Stephen King categorizes Cujo as a quasi-sequel. So while not a sequel in the sense that it picks up where we left off in terms of characters, it's a sequel in the sense that it picks up where we left off with the setting, this case in the town of Castle Rock. It's going to be the first novel he sets the events in for the entire narrative, and with it, he establishes a clear continuity within his novels. This takes place in the same world as the Dead Zone, a world where Carrie didn't happen, but an author named Stephen King published a book with that name. A town named Jerusalem's Lot exists nearby, but whether that town is overrun with vampires, we don't know. Regardless, we see that King is starting to have fun with his stories, and by presenting Easter eggs, he allows an interactivity with the audience that is experienced regularly with television these days, as seen with the analysis and code-breaking of shows like Mad Men, Lost, Breaking Bad, True Detective, and How I Met Your Mother. So the opening of Cujo doesn't just rehash the events of the Dead Zone, but reveals that the townspeople have mythologized Frank Dodds, the serial killer who had been stopped by Johnny Smith and Sheriff Bannerman in the events of the Dead Zone. He might have killed himself, but his memory lives on, and has since mutated into the Boogeyman, a dark fairy tale parents tell their children to warn them of the dangers of the real world. In a sense, the adults immortalize the killer, paying tribute to the evil that lurked within him, the evil that could have dissipated upon his death had they never mentioned him again, but because they chose to, they reawoke it. They fed it and allowed it to take a new form. It's a fantastic way to start the novel and establishes a clear link between the two very different books, a link outside of the setting itself, a link in the form of the concept of evil, which chooses to take many forms, first introduced as a disturbed young man, and in the case of this novel, a rabid dog.
So, despite the fact that this really is just a novel about a rabid dog, Stephen King imbues it with the supernatural horror. So, I mean, this is clearly in the realm of the supernatural. So, over the last couple weeks, I've discussed the diversity amongst the Stephen King books. You had Carrie, which was a sci-fi novel. You had Salem's Lot, which was a horror novel. You had The Shining, which was a horror novel. You had Night Shift, which was just a collection of previously published materials, all of which, you know, are horror with a little bit of sci-fi. You had a fantasy set within a post-apocalyptic world with The Stand. You had a thriller with The Dead Zone. You had a sci-fi thriller with Firestarter, and then here we are with Cujo, which is it's a psychological thriller with a lot of horror overtones. I mean, make no mistake, this is firmly in the realm of supernatural. It's pretty overt, and I didn't realize that when I first read it. Maybe I did, I don't know, maybe I just forgot, but or maybe it's just that in the you know, the pop culture of Cujo has just, you know, the cliff notes, I guess, so to speak. The greatest hits, just I think of Cujo, the association is, oh, it's the story of the rabid dog. I don't remember the whole deal with the, you know, the closet or the evil being reborn as, you know, as the rabies. But no, I mean, this is a small town, and unlike, I don't know, when Salem's Lot first began, you know, Stephen King didn't present it as 100% idealistic. He showed the a little bit of ugliness within Salem's Lot, but he did show its good side. This seems more along the lines of maybe what you would kind of see in Children of the Corn. Now, bear with me. You see the characters almost paying worship to this evil, okay, by talking about it. You know, and when the old resident is looking on the horizon and the heat wave is coming in, that to me, it just, there's almost an almost religion there where you're paying worship to you know, some deity, and in this case it's a dark deity that comes back to your town in the form of this dog. Regardless, King, in the very, very beginning of the novel, builds a very strong sense of dread, and he gives an ominous malevolence to this oncoming heat wave that when it breaks, it just breaks over the townspeople of Castle Rock like an infectious disease. And here's the issue that I have with this novel. In every of the podcasts so far, I've referenced Stephen King as being an optimistic writer, someone that believes in the goodness of humanity, someone, and humanity is represented by the people that inhabit these small towns. Sometimes they'll encounter people of low quality and low character and low intelligence that do mean things in these small towns, but you know, our main characters in this novel always rise above the limitations that can be found within small towns, and just the limitations found within humanity. For people that tend to sink lower, our protagonists always rise a little bit higher. But that writer is nowhere to be found in this novel at all. It's a dark look at small towns. It's just a dark look at humanity. Young marriages are betrayed with infidelity. Townspeople snap and bite at each other irritably. Man's best friend is man's greatest enemy. And mothers wake from nightmares in which their husbands stab their children with pitchforks. This, revealing a very dark fear that your partner doesn't love your child. You know, we see abuse. We see revenge. We see petty revenge. This is not an idealistic small town at all. You know, this is ugly. It's an ugly, ugly book. And I'm going to be very honest. Reading it was a chore because I didn't like it. I didn't like reading this at all. Because it was just so ugly and unrelentingly brutal, and the characters are just punished for no reason. It didn't have to be what it was. And I'm reading the paperback Signet edition, and it's 304 pages of just punishment for the characters. And I didn't find any joy. Usually you'll find joy, you'll find jokes, and I've cracked jokes at how bad some of the jokes are in these books and how funny his characters find it, but you won't find any of that here. It's just grim, and it's mean, and it's, like I said, the only word that just keeps coming to mind is just ugly. You just see the ugly side of humanity. And you see the ugly side of the town people. And so basically when Cujo goes into a rage, his rage is indicative of the rage and the ugliness that the entire town is feeling. So it's not just the story of a rabid dog. It's a story of just, a diseased town during this heat wave. The heat wave being the sickness, with the many people in town exhibiting symptoms, Cujo being the worst of all. But that's maybe people out there like it. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've read it. I've only read it once, and I don't remember it being just so bleak. And the reason at the beginning of the podcast I referenced Stephen King's substance abuse at this time, he has no recollection of writing this book, which is unbelievable to me. First of all, if he doesn't remember writing this and he's under that much of an influence, I still have to say, I mean, the fact that he was able to craft a novel that at times is a pure adrenaline, tension-filled thrill ride. Even when he is so far gone, he is so good. It's unbelievable. But with that said, it's still a book that I ultimately I had some issues with. And I even I feel bad, ripping it to shreds. And I apologize for the change in noise in the background. My air just shut off. But I feel bad even ripping it to shreds because I don't even know what was intentional or unintentional because he doesn't even remember writing it. But anyway, I'm going to get into my review as I usually do. I'm going to look at the characters, and as I was taking my notes, the first character that I started, writing about is Tad, but by the end of the novel, I can't even classify him as a character, and I'll get into that, but unlike Danny Torrance here or Charlie McGee, he can't shine. He's not a fire starter. He is just a boy who, from the first time we meet him, happens to be the object of the boogeyman's desire. Now, there's two ways of looking at the opening here. Either Tad imagines a monster lurking in his closet, like a young child might, but most children are not murdered by the thing that they imagine seeing in their closet. The second way of looking at it is that there really was something in the closet, marking him and telling him exactly what form it was going to be taking when it finally comes for him. So one can argue that the scenes with the monster in the closet are told through Danny's perspective and are therefore biased. There's a monster in the closet because Danny thinks there's a monster in the closet. However, my interpretation is that there's no imagine necessary. There's a goddamn monster in his closet, and it comes for him later on in the story. So when I first read Cujo, I remember Tad being much more definitive of a character. But upon this reread, he just really all Tad is, and this is terrible here, because place in context what happens to Tad here, but all that he is a plot device. He's just no more than a bomb ready to go off or a loaded gun ready to be fired. With Tad, King A establishes the supernatural qualities of the threat by making Cujo the monster in his closet, and B creates a sense of urgency. Mother has to get the son out of the car. Mother can't get son out of the car because Monster Dog is outside. It's really that simple. And Tad doesn't do much to, he doesn't do much but to serve as a gauge that we use to measure the level of tension within the story. And then when his convulsion comes unexpectedly on page 254, I recognize the sensation of the stakes being raised. But I didn't feel the sympathy I wanted to feel for this character because I didn't feel there was too much to him as a character. And ultimately, when Vic arrives on the scene after Donna has killed Cujo, and his discovery of Danny it is written through Donna's point of view, so she hears him rather than focusing really through Vic's perspective, and it's so matter of fact by Vic saying, "Donna, how long has he been dead?" It's horrifying
how impersonal it is for us that we don't experience it. It's a punch in the gut. And this poor kid, and yeah, I get it. He's not a real person. This didn't really happen. But, by writing this, anyone, reading this that has ever lost a child, this is going to be tough. And, I know that a writer doesn't owe, his readers anything. The writer ultimately is telling a story. And this is fiction. This did not happen. But, you are writing in a world where people have suffered loss. So I think that you do have to take these things lightly. And I'm not saying that the death of a child in a story isn't ever warranted. I think that it is, if it's handled the right way. I just don't think in this book it was handled the right way, because I don't think that Tad ever really was a character. And maybe ultimately that makes it a little bit better, because he really wasn't a character. But at the same time, I just think it's handled a little clumsily. And if anyone ever felt hurt by this because it dredged up memories of bad times for themselves, I wouldn't blame them. And then really, typically during this part of the podcast, I review the characters. And to me, there's really, I just talked about Tad, but I don't really think Tad's much of a character. I think there's only really two characters in this novel. I think that it's Cujo and Donna, and everyone else doesn't really matter. I don't think Vic matters. I don't think Steve Kemp matters. I don't think Charity or Brett or Joe really matter. They don't really do much. There's really not much to talk about. I think that's all about Donna and Cujo. So I'm going to talk about Cujo now. In horror movies, it's not uncommon to film scenes in monster vision. The camera acting as the eyes of the monster. Most famously, Spielberg shot many scenes through the shark's perspective in Jaws. King goes one step further here, actually getting into the thought process of Cujo. Now, he doesn't anthropomorphize the creature. He doesn't act like a human. Cujo doesn't think like a human. King manages to capture the existence of being a dog. Well, I guess, as far as I can tell, with authenticity here. But, not being a dog myself, I can't say for certainty, but the scenes through Cujo's perspective are effective at making him an actual character rather than just the monster to be afraid of. To be perfectly honest, by the end of the novel and the entire time throughout, I just couldn't help but feel for Cujo. Because ultimately, he's just as much as a victim in the story as Tad was, as Donna is. He's not making the choice to attack the humans. The rabies, which is the evil that had once been Frank Dodd's, has possessed the once friendly dog, not dissimilarly from the way in which the vampires took over the bodies of the victims in Salem's Lot. Cujo, to me, is much more of a sympathetic character than Jack Torrance, who stewed within his own form of rabies. When given the opportunity, Jack consciously sold his soul and let his humanity get ripped apart by the forces in the Overlook Hotel. Cujo's humanity, if you will, is taken from him. He's never given a chance. He's corrupted from the inside out. So to me, Cujo's, his story, it's the saddest. For me to say that about a novel in which a 5-year-old dies, I think that's saying a lot. Maybe it's because King masterfully makes me care about this dog more so than the humans. Or maybe I just have a soft spot for dogs, and the thought of my own dogs transforming from the living teddy bears they are into rage-fueled monsters whose only purpose is to now harm me is heartbreaking. So, there's many sequences in which we get the perspective of Cujo, and we get one on page 20 to 21. I don't know if it's exactly the first time we see it, but Cujo trotted away. He shook himself again. He pawed helplessly at his muzzle. So this is during the time when he just got bit.
Running a business is hard enough, so why make it harder with a dozen different apps that don't talk to each other? One for sales, another for inventory, a separate one for accounting. Before you know it, you are drowning in software instead of growing your business. This is where Odoo comes in. Odoo is the only business software you'll ever need. It's an all-in-one, fully integrated platform that handles everything. CRM, accounting, inventory, e-commerce, HR, and more. No more app overload. No more juggling logins. Just one seamless system that makes work easier. And the best part? Odoo replaces multiple expensive platforms for a fraction of the cost. It's built to grow with your business, whether you are just starting out or already scaling up. Plus, it's easy to use, customizable, and designed to streamline every process, so you can focus on what really matters, running your business. Thousands of businesses have made the switch, so why not you? Try Odoo for free at odoo.com. That's ODOO.com.
By the rabies. The blood was already clotting, drying to a cake, but it hurt. Dogs have a sense of self-consciousness that is far out of proportion to their intelligence, and Cujo was disgusted with himself. Cujo. He didn't want to go home. If he went home, one of his trinity, the man, the woman, or the boy, all capitalized, by the way, would see that he had done something to himself, and it was possible that one of them might call him bad dog, all capitalized, one word. And at this particular moment, he certainly considered himself to be a bad dog. See, that to me, that makes me feel so much worse than anything that happens to the characters. On page 37, we see that he's starting to change. Now that the rabies are in him, is starting to work, their way through him. King writes, Cujo thumped his tail a little. He didn't know what this man was saying, but the rhythms were familiar and the patterns were soothing. These polemics had gone on a dozen times a week since, well, as far as Cujo was concerned, since forever. Cujo liked this man, who always had food. Just lately, Cujo didn't seem to want food, but if the man wanted him to eat, he would. Then he could lie here, as he was now, and listen to the soothing talk. All in all, Cujo didn't feel very well. He hadn't growled at the man because he was hot, but simply because he didn't feel good. For a moment there, just a moment, he had felt like biting the man. So as you can see, Cujo is starting to turn, and I'm telling you, this breaks my heart, more than what happens to the characters. I feel more for this than I feel for the struggles of Vic and Donna and the whole infidelity in the affair, and and Vic's stupid story about the ad agency. That to me is so irrelevant to the plot. And this, Cujo, this is the plot. This is the character. It's the title of the novel, and it's something that we all can relate to. Whether we've owned a dog, we all are familiar with dogs. We might not be dog people, but even if you've owned a cat, the feeling of what it's like to have a pet. And to actually read about this, about a pet turning and being sick, and he can't do anything about it, well, that is something that I can sink my teeth into. And that to me is the emotional core. So Stephen King writes the effect of the rabies on Cujo very, very interestingly. It doesn't turn him into a monster. All the entire time, Cujo is still relatively sympathetic. Because something is happening to him. He's not happening upon others. He is being happened upon. And so he writes here, he was continually thirsty, but he had already begun to shy away from his water dish some of the time. And when he did drink, the water tasted like steel shavings. The water made his teeth ache. The water sent bolts of pain through his eyes. And now he lay on the grass, not caring about the lightning bugs or anything else. The voices of the men were unimportant rumbles coming from somewhere above him. They meant little to him compared to his own growing misery. So, the whole experience of rabies is going to be categorized by his pain. And the effect that it takes is that anyone that he sees, the rabies makes him think that the person is causing him that pain. So he wants to cause pain to that person, which is an interesting take on the rabies and the rage, really, that infects him. So his first attack, thankfully, is not Brett. Gary bears this notable distinction, and King has decided to stop teasing the reader with the threat of the rabid dog and finally unleashes the rabid dog upon us on page 111. Gary sustains a bite, but manages to make it to safety of the house. Once inside, safety sweeps over him with the relief of water down a dehydrated throat. But like the true master he is, King reveals the figurative glass of water to be simply a mirage, a glass of sand, if you will. Whatever relief you feel you may have had is now gone, never having truly existed, because Cujo at that moment, just as we are able to catch our breath from the tension, bursts through the screen door and rips him to shreds. So Joe is next. After he finds Gary's mutilated body, Cujo bursts out of the basement like a shark from the depths of the ocean. In fact, in all honesty, this novel sounds like an elevator pitch. Jaws meets Old Yeller. And it's an effective elevator pitch, and I wish that it lived up to that concept. I just think that it falls apart. Well, I'll say this. All the scenes with Cujo as the villain work 100%. Everything else should have been cut out, but I'll get to that later. Cujo's attacks are vicious and graphic, but they're not without a purpose. King needed to establish the physical threat of this beast. If he can't do that, then the novel's central conflict is toothless. We have to feel trapped within that car, out of options, powerless against the fury on four legs that decimated two grown men. Once Donna is trapped with Tad, Cujo turns into a full-blown monster that both Tad and Donna recognize from Tad's closet. Cujo acts less like a rabid dog and more like a knowing villain, even playing with his food, as evidenced from the scene on page 174. There was a soft, scuffling, scratching noise on her side of the car. She didn't want to look, but she was helpless to stop herself. Her head began to turn, as if forced by an invisible, yet powerful hand. She could hear the low creak of the tendons in her neck. Cujo was there, looking in at her. His face was less than 6 inches from her own. Only the safety glass of the driver's side window separated them. Those red, bleary eyes stared into hers. The dog's muzzle looked as if it had been badly lathered with shaving cream that had been left to dry. Cujo was grinning at her. Whatever issues I have with this novel, I do not have with the scenes with Cujo and Donna. I think they're incredibly effective. The sense of claustrophobia and tension while Donna and Tad are trapped in the car are very, very palpable, very, very powerful. So, any issues I have, it's not about his ability to write that kind of tension. And as seen with that particular scene, he is a monster. He is a villain who is just playing with his prey. And we get another scene inside his head on page 220, and during that particular scene, Cujo's conflict mirrors Donna's own, linking the two characters despite their hatred of one another at that point. Like Donna, Cujo is thirsty, and he's unable to drink from forces he can't control, much like Donna. But in his case, it's the rabies, which has taken such a hold of him, his hatred overpowers his need to drink water. So it just shows how strong a hold the rabies has, and it's basically just rerouting all the circuitry in his brain and his body to not ignore, but acknowledge that I need water, but I hate the water for what it's doing to me, more than I actually need it. And again, it just reinforces just the effect of the rabies. And then ultimately it's one horror scene after the other with Cujo. And just keep in mind, if you picture Cujo as the shark from Jaws, it's a very appropriate visual image. And his attacks are very similar to a shark. Whenever, someone enters his domain, he attacks. So whenever, someone steps into the water, there's a shark attack. It's very, very similar. It's, it's unrelenting. It's remorseless. And they're just brutally vicious. Sheriff Bannerman arrives, and Sheriff Bannerman is quickly dispatched through a very, very vicious and I would say probably the goriest scene in the novel. But through it all, and with the final showdown in which he's murdered, he's killed, he's put out of his misery by Donna, who, had every right to kill him at that point. King gives us one final reminder on the last page, just a little twist of the knife. And it says, shortly following those mortal events in the Camber dooryard, Cujo's remains were cremated. The ashes went out with the trash and were disposed of at the Augusta Waste Treatment Plant. It would have perhaps been amiss to not point out that he had always tried to be a good dog. He had tried to do all the things his man and his woman, and most of all his boy, had asked or expected of him. He would have died for them if that had been required. He had never wanted to kill anybody. He had been struck by something, possibly destiny, or fate, or only a degenerative nerve disease called rabies. Free will was not a factor. That to me, that breaks my heart. He was a good boy, and it wasn't his fault. Sometimes things happen in Stephen King's books where bad things happen to good people and they make choices, like Carrie White and everything that happened. I think it was Carrie's fault. I mean, there was definitely, effects that had taken place beforehand which led her to enact the revenge, but she was in control. Cujo was not in control. And like I said, that he was a victim. Much like Tad and Donna was, which brings us to Donna. So here, this is the thing. I just don't find any sympathetic characters outside of Cujo, because she's introduced almost immediately as a cheater, having already established an extramarital affair with Steve Kemp, with whom she has had enough. The scene in which she attempts to break it off with Steve reveals the central fear in the novel, and it's a lack of control. More specifically, the fear that when logic fails, you must admit that you're in a wilderness in which humans are not designed to thrive or even survive. All right, so that's the way it's going to turn out for her. But it first rears its head when she's thinking about when she was a teacher, and there's a fear that would overcome her when she would use her voice to get louder and louder. And what happens when you use your loudest voice and it has no control, and the kids are still doing what they want to do? At that point, you realize that you cannot control these kids. And so if that is her idea of a lack of control, then what's going to happen to her later on is an incredible slap in the face, so to speak. And she ultimately perseveres, and she faces her demons in the form of this dog, and she overcomes it, but not without a great loss. But although Cujo was the one who was bitten by the rabid bat, the invisible rage that came to Castle Rock hiding in the summer heat is breathed in by the many Castle Rock inhabitants. And Donna is not immune to this, and she releases her anger on Steve. And Steve responds with his own rage, almost giving it into it completely. So it's happening here and it's just another example that what's happening to Cujo is happening to pretty much everyone, and this is why I think it's a very ugly novel. Everyone is acting ugly. And Donna here, she's just, she's in the throes of a quarter-life crisis. She's uprooted from the life with which she is comfortable. She's feeling stranded and helpless, trapped in rural Maine, a fear that will become life-threatening and quite literal as the book advances. She feels stuck in her house, stuck in a routine that she didn't necessarily want or ask for. Everything that she knows is gone, and she's a New York City girl, and now she's in rural Maine, and she just doesn't feel like herself anymore. Feeling in the wilderness, and she's gonna be in the wilderness and everything that the wilderness entails. And when that finally does occur, we do feel as trapped as she does. And here, King is able to demonstrate his gifts as a writer and remember that he does not remember writing this, which goes to show just how good he is as a writer. His first confrontation with Cujo is a nail-biting encounter. She's trying to run, but she bumps her leg. She almost slides out of control before managing to steady herself with the hood of her car, closing the door just in time. The shock of the dog at the window, the race to close Tad's window before Cujo reaches him. It's all incredibly tense, and King does not let up. He's punishing us just as much as he's punishing his characters. And he just keeps finding new and devious ways to make us squirm with anxiety by providing simple conflicts that mean life or death. None more potent than Donna's choice whether or not to make a break for the Camber's door, a mere 8 steps away. If she makes it, she's safe, potentially. But what if she arrives and the door is locked? Those 8 steps back to the car might as well be 8,000, because Cujo would make sure that you'd never slide behind that wheel again. Or Donna's simple choice to turn the ignition or to not turn the ignition. Is the engine cool enough? And when she does, and the car does start, King plays with her and us like a child offering a candy bar to his eager younger sibling before smashing it on the ground for the pure pleasure of watching them, and in this case, us, cry. King has no intention of letting these two characters go, and his decision to dangle a little bit of false hope for them is a cruel move on his part. But, through it all, his ability to describe a scene, it's just definitely on point. Every scene that he writes with Donna places us firmly in the car with them. I feel every drop of saliva drying out of my mouth. I feel every bead of sweat. Every heavy lungful of thick, stuffy air. It goes on, and that claustrophobia and the heat, the oppressive, stuffy heat, it just grows and grows. And, when Tad starts to slip and you see his deterioration, King has done a good job. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's been growing and growing and growing. So, after the botched rescue by Bannerman, when Tad starts to slip into a deep unconsciousness, at this point, Donna has no choice but to face the monster alone. Stripped of all civility, she confronts the predator in the tall grass with a bat so shattered it might as well be a spear. It's a striking image, and all of this woman's fear, trapped in the wilderness of Maine, becomes very much literal as she devolves into a primal showdown between man and beast. So, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know what was intentional, what wasn't intentional on the part of the writer. But certain things in this novel, do work. Her feeling trapped is played out during the events of her being in the Pinto, and her coming face to face with the dog. Represents her coming face to face with the feeling of being trapped within Maine. And it definitely comes at a loss. So, I don't know really what Stephen King is trying to say here with that, though. Is Tad at that point a sacrifice for her extramarital affair, for her infidelity? If so, what the hell? Tad, didn't do anything. It's not fair to that character. It's not fair to Vic. It's not fair to Donna. They were going to work through it. I had every belief that they were going to be okay. It was going to be a struggle, but Vic didn't think that he was going to leave Donna. I thought there, and Donna admitted that she just was losing herself and she made a mistake. So just King is just, like I said, from the very get-go, just punishing these characters. So like I said, it's just an ugly book through and through. No matter how you cut it, it's an ugly book about ugly people that ends with the fatal dehydration of a child and the main character beating a dog to death. A little hope comes at the end when Brett receives a new dog, but, without the oppressive influence of Joe, the Cambers have an opportunity to start a new life, rage-free. Yeah, that's nice and all, but it's like too little too late to be a truly hopeful ending. It's like placing fresh flowers on a recent grave. It's a kind touch, but it's ultimately pointless. And here's, I guess, I don't know if it's the bigger issue, because just for me reading the novel was unenjoyable because of just how ugly it was. But this book is too long. There are just chapters and chapters and chapters of Donna and Vic and Charity that just do not contribute to the story and don't further what's already established of the characters. Once Charity leaves Castle Rock, the narrative does not need to check in with her again. And yet it does again and again and again. So I get that it's a brutal book, and the description of a rabid Cujo are very impressive, and he creates a tangible feeling of claustrophobia and fear once Donna and Tad get trapped within the Pinto. It's just that there's large portions of extraneous material that could have and probably should have been cut down to streamline what's a very simple story. Instead, it just gets bogged down with too much character work that slows the momentum and made me lose interest. Once Donna gets stuck at the garage, I really don't need to read about Vic. All that matters is that Donna and Tad are stuck at this place. In fact, by focusing only on them, it would have added to their isolation, claustrophobia, and vulnerability. If at that point they are the only characters with whom we interact, then that would only reinforce the feeling that they are the only two left in this world, abandoned with a bloodthirsty monster. So I'm going to switch gears. I've kind of talked around Jaws a little bit, but I really want to dive into the water, so to speak, with Jaws. I mean, when Spielberg adapted Jaws from Peter Benchley's novel, he and Carl Gottlieb, the screenwriter, made a small but crucial change to the story. Just as in the novel, Chief Brody, Matt Hooper, and Quint go off in their quest to slay the shark. However, Spielberg realized once his characters stepped away from land, he couldn't have them return to it. From that point forward, we are on board the Orca with the three of them. This choice simulates the sensation of being far from home, and in the case of Jaws, in the natural environment of the monster they are currently hunting, an environment man was not designed to exist within, an alien planet whose alpha predator could swallow you whole. Unlike the book, once they set sail, they don't return until the shark is killed. In the novel, however, they return each night. Structurally, each night they return, the tension is released. Whereas in the movie, the tension has nowhere to go and builds up with the characters as well as in the viewer. I feel like King released the tension every single time he stepped away from Donna and Tad. Every time we checked in with Vic or Steve Kemp or Charity or Brett, it was this release, and I feel like there shouldn't have been a release. All right, like I said, this is 300 pages. I'm sorry, it's 400 pages. This novel could have been maybe 150, 200 pages tops, and it could have been lean and mean, but it wasn't. I didn't need to read about these other characters. I mean, the heart of the story is of a mother and son trapped in a car with a rabid dog lying in wait. Everything else is so disconnected to that premise that it just doesn't fit. In other novels, King can spend time with the characters, and this characterization can help serve the story. So look at Salem's Lot. King dedicated whole chapters to the goings-on of the townspeople, and in that book, it was necessary to the plot of that particular novel. That's a story about a small town corrupted by vampires. To make that corruption really pop, it's important to spend time with the townspeople. That novel had a macro view, but Cujo's view is incredibly micro. Everything outside of the central conflict doesn't matter because it doesn't serve the conflict at all. There are many options King could have taken to place the Trentons in this predicament. All that we needed to know is that Donna and Tad are stuck alone. That's it. There are many roads that we could have taken to get there, but King took a very circuitous road and kept revisiting the little trails and pathways that he had taken to get there. But a long, drawn-out affair, complete with a spurned lover and a husband on the verge of a professional crisis, is unimportant to a story about a rabid dog. Still not convinced? King spends 2 paragraphs on page 193 detailing the mailman's recent increase in farting. I don't need it. I like character tics and traits and quirks, that's fine. But honestly, this book did not need to be as long as it was. And all of this padding just took away what could have been a really strong novel. So scenes like Steve's visit to Donna's house are beyond unnecessary. From a plot perspective, it doesn't contribute to the propulsion of the story and certainly doesn't add to the conflict. It reminds the reader that a red fog of rage has come with the heat, a monster that had once taken the form of Frank Dodds, but King had already symbolized the rage as a rabid dog. So while it's neat on a surface level to watch other town members succumb to their own strains of metaphorical rabies, as I've stated, it just doesn't add anything. Going back to Jaws again, Spielberg, cut out, some B plots and some subplots to the novel that didn't help the story. It almost got in the way. So in a story like Jaws, which is so similar to Cujo in the sense that it's man versus shark, it's woman versus dog. All right, it's the protagonist versus nature is really what it comes down to. In the novel of Jaws, the mayor is involved with the mafia. Hooper's having an affair with Chief Brody's wife, and these things don't really add to the central conflict. Yeah, I get it. It can create tension on the Orca between Hooper and Brody, but really, I mean, all that we needed to know is that there's a shark. They're hunting the shark. Hey, the shark's hunting them, right? That's all that we need. All that we need in this book is mother and son are trapped in a car. There's a monster waiting outside of the car. Mom needs to get help for her son, but can't because of that monster outside of the car. That's really all that the novel has to be. So, like I said, I just, between the ugliness and the unnecessary parts, which I'll be honest, let's just say I would get to page 200. I would look in the next couple of pages. Oh, we're following a mailman now. Oh, we're following a mailman for 5 pages. I would look at each page. I wouldn't necessarily read it. I would read the beginning. I would read the end to see physically where the mailman is and where the mailman is going. And by the last couple paragraphs of the final scene with whatever character is not in the car, you can tell what the character is doing and whether or not the character is going to be a Scooby snack for Cujo or not. Which means that everything in between didn't really matter. So I'll be honest. I mean, I didn't pay as much attention to this novel as I should have. For someone that's reviewing it. But I had a hard time. I'll be honest. I just had a hard time. So we have some references because I just want to get away from the review itself. So some references here. We have the Dead Zone, first and foremost, and make no mistake. While this novel serves as a standalone story, it's a sequel. It's a sequel to the Dead Zone. The monster of the Dead Zone returns in Cujo in the form of a rabid dog, and King even gives us a confrontation between the evil and the Dead Zone's supporting character, Castle Rock Sheriff George Bannerman. He is reintroduced in the novel when Vic contacts the police over his concern. And then King maneuvers Bannerman to the Camber's garage, where he's immediately disposed of by Cujo. In the attack, Bannerman actually recalls Frank Dodds when he's looking into his eyes, and he realizes that it's Frank. So again, this is not... It's supernatural. I mean, this is the reincarnation of Frank Dodds that has taken over through rabies. This poor dog. And Bannerman, the good-hearted small-town cop who had once reached out to a local psychic to protect his people, dies a horribly violent and gory death. This guy feels every bite and is overcome by fear and confusion. It's a brutal end for a relatively good man. He does his best to reach his cruiser to call for help, but the dog is too much for him. And just like that, our 2 heroes from the Dead Zone are both dead. Here, King reminds us that he doesn't play lightly. He plays for keeps. And the characters that you might think are safe, a friendly neighborhood cop you remember from that other book, are anything but. And I don't know about references here, but reading about this malevolent entity in the closet reminded me of the night shift story, The Boogeyman. And I don't know if King thought of that. I don't know if this is another incarnation of the Boogeyman, which feels very similar to what ultimately would become it in my review of The Boogeyman and the Night Shift review. I discussed The Boogeyman as being a prototype for the monster in it itself, Pennywise the Dancing Clown, a shapeshifter that lurks in dark places and feeds off children. So that, if that's what we're describing it as, this monster, that fits the bill here. This is a monster that lurks in dark places, that takes many forms and feeds on children. So it didn't literally feed on Tad, but it's responsible for Tad's death. And I feel like it would have, gotten some sort of energy off of him, knowing that it was just causing so much pain and hurt and tension and dread and fear. So I don't know. I don't know. It could either be the same, entity. It could be just a different facet of the same diamond. It could be of the same species. So those are just a couple references. The more we get into the Stephen King books, the more references we'll see. And this brings us to the point of the podcast in which I will discuss our King-isms. Our King-isms are certain tropes and patterns and traits that you will see from Stephen King book to Stephen King book. And the first one is our child, not protagonist, but, very prominently King focuses on children. So we had Danny Torrance, we had Charlie McGee, and now we have Tad Trenton. And our number 2, I had discussed it. It's the monster. So we have the monster in the closet that once took the form of Frank Dodds and later as the rabid dog is very similar to the shape-shifting entity as seen in It. So I cannot wait until we discuss It and the significance of that book. To really just to discuss all of the things that Stephen King was playing with. And then we have Castle Rock. This was first introduced in Dead Zone. King starts to populate it with the townspeople who will serve as dog food for Cujo. And then number 5. Okay, again, I have. I'm always uncomfortable talking about this one, but it's racism. It's racism to denote unlikable characters. So on page 126, Joe recollects a time in which. I don't know. I mean, he drops the N-word. That's what it comes down to, and so this is on top of the great lengths that Stephen King had gone to establish his abuse towards his wife, as well as his small-mindedness. So I understand that the use of the N-word falls into that category of small-mindedness, but by this point, it's really overkill. It's really unnecessary. It's not a word that I personally am comfortable with. Maybe that's my own thing. I don't know. But I don't like seeing it when I don't have to see it. And then we have commas enclosing italicized print to denote a character's thoughts. Specifically thoughts interrupting the natural flow of thoughts. So this is maybe Stephen King's number 1 Kingism. You just see this again and again. And we've seen it before, and we're going to see it again. And then last but not least, isolated from safety by a monster in waiting. So the central conflict that is plaguing Donna and Tad is very similar to the central conflict that plagues the main characters from The Raft. They're isolated, they're alone, they're very close to shelter and safety. They can see the beach in The Raft, but they can't get there because of the monster in the water. Same here. Donna can see the house. She can't get to the house because of the monster that's right outside. And now we've come to the part of our podcast where I like to share what I believe that the most important textual excerpt is. Something that just boils down the plot and the essence of the novel down to one bite-sized bit. And this one's right away. In fact, I could read the whole first and second pages, which just recounts Frank Dodds and the influence that Frank Dodds has had since then. But I'm going to start on page 4. There were nightmares, to be sure, and children who lay wakeful, to be sure, and the empty Dodd house, for his mother had a stroke shortly afterwards and died, quickly gained a reputation as a haunted house and was avoided. But these were passing phenomenon, perhaps unavoidable side effects of a chain of senseless murders. But time passed. 5 years of time. The monster was gone, the monster was dead. Frank Dodd moldered inside his coffin. Except that the monster never dies. Werewolf, vampire, ghoul, unnameable creature from the wastes. The monster never dies. It came to Castle Rock again in the summer of 1980. That is something that concept is something that Stephen King is definitely going to play with again with It. But it's definitely that's his thesis for this particular novel. The monster doesn't die. The monster continued, and the monster tore apart this family, and I felt bad for them, even though they're fictional characters. It's brutal. It's brutal to read. So ultimately, I gotta say, if someone didn't know anything about Stephen King and this was the first novel that they picked up, and it was Cujo, and they read it, and they said, "Oh, Stephen King, I don't like that guy. He's mean and it's cruel and it's just it's blood and guts, and I didn't like." You know what? If that was one person's first Stephen King book and they didn't like it, I completely agree. If they don't ever want to read one by him, I mean, I think that I would have a hard time kind of talking them into it if they didn't like this book. You know, I really think that, a movie like Requiem for a Dream is a very effective movie. I would say it's a good movie, but it's a movie that I'm never going to watch again because I just think it was an unenjoyable experience. And there are parts to Cujo that are just masterfully done. So, I mean, even, and I've taken it to town today, but, even any issues that I have, it's still, you see why Stephen King is Stephen King. I mean, the scenes, with Donna and Tad in the Pinto are incredible. It's just I think that everything else around it should have been cut out. But it's very similarly. I think that just like Requiem for a Dream, I never really want to watch that again. I don't ever really want to read Cujo again. So it's the first, is it negative? Is this a negative review? I don't know, but it's definitely the first non-positive review of a Stephen King book so far on the Stephen Kingcast. So I don't know, guys. Next week we are going to be reviewing the Cujo film adaptation before heading back into the textual works of Stephen King. So I'm sorry, guys. I wish that I could have reported much more positively on this one, but I definitely had some issues here. So if there's any books out there that you might or movies that you might want to read or watch if you liked this particular book. I mean, clearly I've talked about Jaws. I would go out and watch Jaws right now. Jaws is hands down my favorite movie of all time. I think that it's a perfect example of storytelling. It's just great all around. Man versus nature. The characters just really come to life. Very believable. Just so well done. And then there's a novel by Jack Ketchum that if you read this and you want to continue just the mood of just feeling beat up all the time, then I recommend you go out and get it. It's entitled Red, and it is about a man and his dog. The dog doesn't go rabid or anything, but it's not the happiest story of a man and his dog, much like this is not the happiest story of a man and his dog, or a boy and his dog. But it deals very similarly. It's about a lot of rage involving a dog. So it's like a spiritual successor to Cujo, I guess you could say. So those are some recommendations for you that you can go check out. And so, like I said, next week we'll be reviewing the film adaptation of Cujo. Hope everyone has a great week. Again, thank you everyone for checking out the Stephen Kingcast. Feel free to drop me a line at stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. If you would completely disagree with me, then please feel free to do so. If you do agree with me, feel free to tell me as well. But I would just definitely love to hear it from you. So, stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. In the meantime,
may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I'll see you here next time where MOON spells Stephen Kingcast.